Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbyville. From the summer of 1987 to the summer of 1996, Major General Thomas G. Darling served as the Commandant of the Texas A&M Corps of Cadets. But his years of service to our country started long before that, 33 years before to be exact. Aggie class of 1954, 2 months after graduation, active duty Air Force. Learned to fly, and boy did he fly. More than 7,000 hours, 500 of those piloting the giant B-52 on some 46 combat missions in Vietnam. His story would take weeks to tell. We'll do the best we can over the next 2 episodes of Veterans of the Valley. General Darling, it's a pleasure to have you here on Veterans of the Valley. Thank you very much. Let's sort of pick it up. You were born in 1932 in Abilene, and that's where you grew up. Your mom and dad never went to college, but they were intent that you were going to be an Aggie and go to Texas A&M, right?
Yes, that's right. My dad followed Texas A&M and the Experiment Station Extension Service, news bulletins, helping run the dairy farm, and he put it in my mind early on that I should go to college, that he didn't have that opportunity, but he wanted me to have it. So from about the 5th grade on, I was coming to Texas A&M.
And indeed you did. You were high school, you were a basketball star. And, well, they fancied you a star, and you came to A&M actually with the intent of playing some basketball, right?
That's right. I'd played on the Abilene High School team for 2 years, and we had a good team. We didn't quite make it to state, but one of the A&M coaches had watched me one time and invited me to come down, and I did, and he agreed that I would be in the athletic dorm and have a chance to make the Aggie team. Without a scholarship, so I did come under that circumstance.
Right, and you played 2 years?
I played 2 years.
That 50-51 team, they're sort of in the history book, aren't they?
Well, they are. I think the first one under the NCAA to make playoffs.
Right.
And we had an outstanding team that year, a new coach, and not much was expected, but we did have 2 or 3 really great players. Buddy Davis, who later won the high jump in the Olympics, was our center. He played professional ball for several years. And then a guard that I had to guard in practice, Mcdowell, was one of the toughest guys I've ever known.
Right.
He could shoot a 2-handed set shot. They don't do that anymore, but he was a master at it. But around some good guys that I played with, and I still count them as friends.
As a matter of fact, we're going to have a photograph, as a matter of fact, a little later on of that 50-51 team with you in the picture. The Korean War was going on at this time while you were at Texas A&M, and you had the opportunity, though, to stay in school and finish your education before you went into the service, right?
That's right. Because I was in the Air Force ROTC, I was allowed to stay in school. However, I saw a number of my friends drafted out of school during the Korean conflict. We were all prepared to go and serve in that conflict had it gone on, but it ended before my graduation, and actually during about the time of my graduation, the country had gone into a demobilization. And in fact, several of my classmates did not get commissioned to come into the Air Force. They'd been in the ROTC, but the Air Force decided they didn't need as many people then, and they said, unless you're a technical major in a technical field or you want to fly, we're not going to bring you in as a second lieutenant. I was an ag major, but they let me come in to be a pilot.
Indeed.
And again, a number of my classmates did not make it in, initially anyway, but I think the Air Force later relented and did commission those folks.
Graduated from A&M May of 1954. A couple of months later, you were on active duty, and you did want to fly. You went to Randolph down in San Antonio for a while, but then you went to a contract flying school in Arizona. Talk about what that was about.
Okay, in those days, flying training was done by private contractors. There were 7 or 8 of these around the country, and I was named to go to Arizona, a place called Marana, Arizona, a little place in the desert about 30 miles north of Tucson. After 2 weeks of indoctrination in San Antonio, I did move on to Arizona. I was married then, and my wife and I lived in Tucson, and we commuted, those of us in the military, up to Marana each day to fly. I was in class mostly with West Point and Naval Academy graduates. They had all come on duty. Those who graduated in '54, in May they graduated, so they brought them right on in. So they were a little bit ahead of us from data rank and all.
Right.
And that was a big thing to us back in those days. These guys had a data rank on us. But anyway, I began flying training there in July, and some great people in those classes. Some of them went on to make 4-star general. One of them, David Scott, became one of the first astronauts. Guy that was in my class won the aerobatics competition among our class. But that first day of flying, I was eager for it. My time to fly was in the afternoon, early afternoon. Not knowing better, I'd gone to the dining hall and had a good meal and tanked up on a big piece of cherry pie. I thought this is all pretty good. But reported to the flying the ready room, and we got in briefing from our instructor, and my time to fly came, and it was very hot, above 100 degrees, and we went out, took off. It was so-called dollar ride, meaning I wasn't really responsible for anything. I wasn't being evaluated per se, but he showed me some of the things about the airplane. We kind of flew around the edges of the area that we would be working in, and he pointed out some landmarks to me, and I could see the big cactus down there, 20 feet tall or more. A lot of cotton field, cotton 5-6 feet tall. And he told me, if you ever have to crash, put it on the cotton. That'll cushion your crash. I think that was good advice. I never had to do that. But anyway, after he'd done that, he said, well, what would you like to do? And I said, I don't know. I don't know any maneuvers. So about that time, he pulled a thing up in a sharp climb and rolled it, and put it in a barrel roll is what he did. And immediately all I could see is a whirl spinning around underneath me through a plexiglass canopy. And about that time, my cherry pie and everything came up, and I was sick as I could be. Well, we landed, and my job was to clean up the airplane, as is the custom. And I was directed to the flight surgeon to seek help. But I found a lot of my classmates over there that day. The flight surgeon didn't tell us too much, but anyway, I was worried that I might not make this thing. Right. I didn't want to be a failure. I came there to fly and succeed. But the next day, I talked to my flight instructor about it, and he said, we're going to put you to work today. He said, I want you to control the airplane. I'm going to talk you through everything. And from that day on, I never had another problem getting airsick flying an airplane. That's interesting. As long as you were the pilot, you had no problem. Right. But you say to this day, when you're a passenger on a plane, you could still get wheezy, right? If I'm tucked back in the back and they're doing some pretty violent maneuvers or something like that, can make me a little green. I can understand. You left Arizona in 1955, went to San Angelo, and your first multi-engine experience was with B-25s, right? That's right. They decided I should go to multi-engines, and that was okay with me. San Angelo was fine. That's not far from where I grew up, and I could go see some of the folks once in a while, I thought. So I checked in there, and they were flying the B-25, which was a famous World War II bomber. In fact, it's the one that they flew the Tokyo raid with. That was the B-25. But they saved a lot of these, and they were the airplane we were using for multi-engine training. So I spent 6 months in San Angelo, dodging thunderstorms in West Texas in the spring. Fortunately, we had some because those were drought years, and I remember one day when it turned pitch black at 3 o'clock in the afternoon due to a sandstorm. But I had good experiences there, and graduated on, I believe, the 1st of August, 1955, with my wings. Went on to Carswell in Fort Worth, where you were assigned to a B-36 unit. You told a story about having seen the movie with Jimmy Stewart, and they flew B-36s. You were pretty excited. You were going to fly that big plane. Well, yes and no, I guess. I was afraid. I was scared. It came as such a surprise. Like I said, I had seen this movie, Strategic Air Command, with Jimmy Stewart. My wife and I had watched it within 6 weeks of my graduation, and it never occurred to me that I might end up in that. But that was my order when I graduated, along with a few others in my class. We were sent to Carswell to sort of be a test program to see if young guys right out of flying school could work their way into the B-36 program. When I got to Carswell, I found that most of the crew members there were lieutenant colonels and majors, a few captains. Nearly everyone was a World War II experienced person. People that I respected and really looked up to. A lot of them had a spot promotion. General LeMay was the commander of SAC at the time, and he really had it going. He had some way gotten approval to grant spot promotions to people who were doing exceptionally well. The SAC crew duty was pretty quantifiable in bombing and navigation and all of that. And he could pick out the crews that were the best, and he could just say, you've got a spot promotion. And I looked at all these guys with spot promotions, and this was really impressive to me. People that were really one rank ahead of what they were supposed to be and drawing the pay for it. But anyway, that's what I saw when I came there, and the second day I was there, they sent me down to a squadron to fly my first mission, and it was a 16-hour mission. I looked at that airplane and thought, you know, I don't know how I could ever fly that. It was just so big and bulky and so complicated compared to the little planes that I'd flown in flying school. But anyway, I did make that flight, mostly in the radio room, sitting on the cold floor with a parachute on my back. One time they did say, get your helmet on, which was an old cloth helmet, and your oxygen mask. And we were pressure breathing at 40,000 feet. That was a requirement to try to make one bomb run, practice bomb run at 40,000 feet. I'd never been that high before. But I did get on the flight deck for a little bit of the flight, and after it was all over, I thought it seemed like a week we'd been up, and I still had some doubts whether this is for me and whether I'd done the right thing signing up for all of this. But things got a lot better.
Eventually, you got 1,000 hours in that B-36, and you had one flight of 30 hours from England to Carswell.
That's right. My unit deployed over to England there a couple of years after I came to Carswell, and coming back, we ran into severe headwinds, and it was almost a 30-hour flight coming back, and that's the longest flight I've ever made.
Right. Eventually, the B-36 program was somewhat folded up, and it was converted to a B-52 program. You went to California. You trained as a co-pilot. Talk about aerial refueling, because this is when you got an experience with that.
We didn't do that in the B-36. It was just
right.
There's no capability for that, although we flew long missions. But in the B-52, it offered the opportunity to be refueled in flight from a tanker, a KC-97 or a KC-135. It meant that you had to maneuver the B-52 up in close proximity to that plane and close within a refueling envelope, which is just a few feet, and maintain that position for as long as the fuel was being transferred from the tanker to the bomber. Well, my crew that was going through training, I was the co-pilot. My pilot had a hard time. In fact, he couldn't get within a mile of that tanker. It was, you know, he just weaving in and out and just couldn't seem to get the concept. And finally, the instructor took control and said, let me show you how to do it. And I saw him working very hard, maneuver that airplane right under the tail of this tanker. And, you know, you could see the numbers and everything. You could read anything on that tanker. And we were so close, it was scary. You know, it is formation at its tightest, and stay there. And, you know, it looked so dangerous and so difficult to me watching him do this. And I thought to myself again, you know, I'm not sure I can do that. That just looks too hard.
Right.
But as I've told others, sometimes training is just a day-by-day process. You learn a little bit and you build on that, and pretty soon you can do that. And later on, I did learn to do that, and wouldn't say I was all that great at it, but I could hang on and get the one gulper sometimes.
Eventually, you went to back to Carswell, upgraded to aircraft commander. I want to stop now and go to some pictures, looking at some of the things that we've been talking about so far, and then we'll come back and talk about the involvement that you had militarily in the Cold War and eventually to Vietnam. Let's go ahead and get to some photographs. You can look at them right there, and there is a young Thomas Darling. About how old were you there?
Well, let's see, how old was I? Let's see, I was about 7, 8 years in the service, so that made about 29 probably.
Okay. Let's go to the next picture. I think we're going to go back in history some. There you're a student at Texas A&M, and there you're sitting on Sol Ross's shoulders.
Well, Sol Ross was big to us back in those days, and I don't know, we were clowning around one day and making pictures, and I climbed up on Sully, and somebody made my picture there.
That's a great photograph. All right, let's move on. There's the basketball team, 50-51 Texas A&M basketball team, and you're number 56 there, front row, just Right there, middle
center.
right.
Well, I didn't even know this shot was still around. A couple of weeks ago at the football game, they focused on number 33, front and center, Tex Farmer. They highlighted him for his contributions through the 12th man and all the good things that he's done. He was a good friend, but they had him circled in white. And I looked at that picture and I said, that's me next to him. And sure enough, that is me, number 56 there on the front. But to my left, to the right, as you're looking at the pictures, this fellow, Jewel McDowell, I told you was one of the greatest basketball players I ever knew. He was All-American player that year. And the tallest guy on the back row, number 98, is Buddy Davis, who became a high jumper because he didn't like to go out for spring basketball practice we had in those days. He went and do track so he could avoid spring basketball, I think. Anyway, he became an Olympic high jump champion and a professional basketball player.
I guess that picture was taken back at the old DeWare Fieldhouse, is that right?
That's the DeWare Fieldhouse, that's right.
How about that? And that's the new coach, John Floyd, on the right.
Right.
Here you are. Talk about this picture. We moved forward a little bit. When was this one taken?
This was a PR picture, I would say, made during flying school. We didn't even wear that kind of helmet, but they put a helmet and a scarf on us to dress us up, make us look like aviators, I guess. But that's while I was going through flying school.
All right. You got that PR smile. What are we looking at here? This is
okay. We were talked a minute ago about me being at Carswell, and this was my first crew when I had upgraded to aircraft commander, or first pilot, if you would.
Your middle front there.
Me there, center front, but 6 members on a B-52 crew, and the fellow there on the left, little guy, was a second lieutenant, one of the sharpest guys I've ever known, most eager pilot or flyer I've ever known. He came in with 2 years of college through the aviation cadet program, and eventually got his degree through bootstrap and finally a master's degree. He went to Vietnam. He went through pilot training later. He was a navigator there, but he went to Vietnam, was shot down in an F-4 and picked up, and later made 2-star general.
I'll be darned.
The guy in the back center was my electronic warfare officer. He was an Aggie. He had an electrical engineering degree from Texas A&M. And the guy on the right back there was my radar navigator, was the guy that put the bombs on the target and was really good at it. But a great young crew there, and we settled in and had a great run as a crew there at Carswell.
All right, let's move on to the next picture. This is the B-36, right?
Yeah, this backs up a little bit to my B-36 days. This is a B-36 in the background there. You can't quite see all of it, but some may remember it had 6 pusher-type props on the back of the wing, plus 2 jets on each wingtip. A total of 10 engines on this airplane, 4 jets and 4 pusher-type props. Massive airplane. That's the 9th Bomb Squadron lined up there beside this airplane, and I'm in that picture somewhere. I've never tried to figure out where I am, but I can remember when that picture was made.
I can imagine that any young flyer looking at the mass of that airplane would be somewhat intimidated, thinking that they were going to be in command of it.
Well, that was me the day I signed in at Carswell.
All right, I think here's a great picture of a B-52 and 2 of 3 planes that are in formation. I think the picture is actually being taken by the 3rd plane that's in the formation.
Well, the B-52 came into the inventory about 1955-56, starting with the A model, and they went all the way through the H model, which is still flying today. I think there's still less than 100 B-52s in the active inventory. But this airplane has been around over 50 years. It's hard to believe. But when I came back from training in California to Carswell to pick up my own crew and begin operating there, we flew in brand new airplanes from the factory.
Indeed.
F models is what we were getting. And
this picture, you were on the right, and tell people who the older lady is.
Well, that's Mrs. Douglas MacArthur there in the front row, shaking hands with the officer. This was a few years later when I was at the Armed Forces Staff College, and which is a joint school. It was really designed to teach joint operations, coalition planning, joint planning. All of our streets and buildings and everything were named after some joint operation or some joint name, but we didn't have a name on our auditorium, and decided that maybe we ought to name that the MacArthur Auditorium. Mrs. MacArthur came to Norfolk frequently. Her husband is buried there. She thought it was a wonderful idea. So she came for a big ceremony we had when we named the auditorium the MacArthur Auditorium.
Right. All right, let's move on to the last picture. This is your wife Evelyn on the right, and you're getting promoted.
This is my wife Evelyn on the right there, who was a great contributor to my career. I give her great credit for that, but she served beside me for all my years. That's Vice Admiral John Sanderson on the left. They were pinning on my second star, which I received shortly after I went to the Armed Forces Staff College in 1972.
All right. Very proud. We've got a few minutes left here in this show, and again, we're going to be visiting with General Darling the next show also, because there's a lot of story to tell. We're going to fast forward, though. October of '62, the Cuban Missile Crisis. A lot of people of our age certainly remember those 13 days of crisis in world politics, and talk about what your involvement was with the B-52 in that crisis.
Well, those were very interesting times. As you know, they had the U-2 plane had taken photos of missiles in Cuba that the Soviets had moved in there and became very threatening to the United States and allies. And I remember being at the officers club one day and got a message to report to the commander's office immediately. And when I did, I was told that my crew would be launching the next night on what we called Airborne Alert, which is a 24-hour mission where everything is loaded and cocked and you're ready to go to war. We had flown some of these missions during more peaceful times to make sure we were sending a signal to the Soviets that we're doing this kind of thing and to kind of give them notice. But when this Cuban missile thing came up, SAC decided to launch, I believe it was over 60 B-52s on Airborne Alert from different places, different bases. But these airplanes were kept up 24 hours a day. Each plane would fly a 24-hour mission, but they'd be replaced. But we did that throughout the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I flew a number of these 24-hour missions where we had nuclear weapons on board, everything was armed. We had targets assigned to strike if we got the go code. We took off and flew over the Atlantic and over Spain and refueled with a tanker out of Spain, taking on 125,000 pounds of fuel. We'd fly on down the Mediterranean, turn around, come back, refuel a second time over Spain, head back down the Mediterranean, and then turn around just so we would have enough fuel to get all the way back home. But all along there, we were vulnerable to be given the go code where we would be committed to go strike targets in the Soviet Union. And each day when we would fly home back across the Atlantic, I could see the Soviet ships, the armada of ships that were headed for Cuba. And, you know, we'd look at that and really wonder, you know, what's going to happen. But it was a time of great stress, and I think it's the closest we ever came to nuclear war. In fact, a lot of us believed it was pretty imminent at the time. But thank goodness, through in part our action to fly these 24-hour missions, but the fact that SAC put over 1,500 airplanes dispersed throughout the United States on alert with weapons on board, all of that, I think, caused Mr. Khrushchev to blink and back up, and he did turn those ships around. But we did that roughly 3 weeks in there, in a very critical time in our history.
Eventually, we move on. You were deployed to Vietnam. Vietnam came along in around 1965, and you were deployed at Vietnam. I'd like to start the story here. We got a couple of minutes left, and then we'll pick it up again next week. But you were actually deployed to Guam as a B-52 pilot.
That's right. I was stationed at Turner Air Force Base in Albany, Georgia. Had a B-52 crew, and our wing was outfitted with the Big Belly bomber. That's a name we used then to describe the enhancement to carry large numbers of conventional bombs. In fact, we could carry 108 500-pound bombs.
Wow.
24 on the pylons of the wings, but the others internally. So we deployed to Guam and participated in mostly saturation bombing. Not all of it was that. I remember within 2 or 3 weeks after I was there, we were directed to launch on this big mission that would take us into North Vietnam. It was the Mcdowell Pass. It was a steep tunnel area, cliff area on each side, with the Viet Cong sending their supplies down there, the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Thinking was if we could stop that supply route, cut it off, that we could have an impact on the war. Well, I remember one night we launched 60 airplanes 1 minute apart. All our tankers were there on Guam with us because they'd evacuated due to a typhoon in Okinawa. But they were there with us, and we launched those 60 airplanes, which a minute apart, without one hiccup, without one substitution or anything. One of the most amazing aviation feats I've ever known, as far as launching big airplanes like that with total success. The mission had all the trappings of full combat. We went radio silence, lights out, and all of that, but could hear on the radios, and you could hear all the stuff going. From SAMs and people dodging them to MiGs and all the things at work.
And I'll tell you what, we're going to pick it up right there on the next show because there's a lot more to tell, including your career at Texas A&M. Thank you, and we'll be back next week. As you would guess, General Thomas Darling's story of service to his country and eventually to his school does not end there. It's indeed barely started. There's Naval War College, his stint at the Pentagon, commander of a B-52 bomb wing, various assignments with the Strategic Air Command, commandant of the Armed Forces Staff College, and all that before coming back to Texas A&M as Corps Commandant. I'm Tom Turbeville, so please join us next time as we continue our visit with Major General Thomas G. Darling on Veterans of the Valley.